Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. We are getting straight into this next chapter as it is such a good one. We have a lot going on and a hell of a lot to discuss. So, without further ado, chapter 1178, A Fading Nightmare. And the cover story request this week is Kid running away from a charging bull, very similar to the Pamplona sort of bull racing that they do in Spain. Obviously, his jacket and his hair is very red, so we see the connection there with the bull. But nevertheless, we have a chapter in Elbaf to talk about. So, last we had left off, we mainly saw the bulk of the giant warrior pirates being dealt with and being sort of dispatched and killed to be reversed back into their original form so that the demon possession that was happening would lose its effect. They were just getting cleared out, and we found the big reveal that Chopper only needed to tap an ancient giant who was under this possession, and they would revert back immediately. And everyone was freaking out at this reveal, like Kashi and Gabon, and they weren't quite sort of clued in as to why Chopper, in his full monster point, was able to just not even really damage a giant, but nevertheless it got rid of the demonic possession. So that was certainly a big question of last chapter, and we saw that on the other side of the island, the Straw Hat had dealt with the sort of fiasco going on at the library and the school. They had immediately just dispatched killing him, and they'd put him into parts and realised that the Holy Knights can't regenerate themselves if you don't destroy their parts. So breaking off Killingham's head, his torso, his legs, and separating them out, the body can't regenerate them because the limbs are still out there and they're not able to get back together to reform. So they were just holding him hostage at that point because they just easily had dealt with him. And we get the conversation from Frankie and Sanji saying, we are just that strong now. Luffy's one of the four emperors, we're his crew. Of course, we're actually much stronger. And Sanji was more directing the conversation towards, these guys are meant to be the ones protecting the Holy Land. They really didn't pose that much of a threat to a degree, or, he was kind of confused of the essence of their power and who they were protecting and what their job is and what we've ultimately seen. So Sanji was kind of torn in that regard. But nevertheless, they had done that. Luffy and Loki decided to appear, and everyone seemed dead happy until Nami absolutely lost it. Started screaming at Loki, at Luffy, for causing all the carnage. They were doing just as much damage for just running wild, and they needed to rein it in because they're no better than what the Holy Knights were trying to do. So the best panel was Luffy being so dejected, so just upset by being told off, and Ragnar the little squirrel was trying to comfort him. It is the greatest panel that we've had so far this sort of arc. And we see Luffy and Loki then have a spat. Loki tries to breathe lightning at Luffy to no effect, and is surprised by, this rubber man isn't affected by lightning. Go figure. But they immediately jump into action because they feel Eames' presence going off once again. And it turns out, down in the middle of the branch that everything is happening on, Brook is down, literally just sort of beaten to a pulp, looks rough, and was dispatched quite quickly by Eam in Gunko's body. Usopp was stood on principle. He'd been waiting years to come here. He was not going to leave Brook, especially on this island, the one he'd wanted to come to have the pride of a warrior. And these underhanded tricks, the way they were going to have the kids as hostages, the way they've gone about all like the nightmares and then reversing all the giants to fight each other. There was no pride in it. And Usopp is like, why don't you, face the giants head on yourself, fight them sword and shield and honour their traditions. And then Ian decided to just play about with Usopp and just literally called him out to be like, a ruler doesn't sully their own hands. Decides to just absolutely destroy Usopp. Like, my brother just didn't catch a break to the point where he went to fire off his skull explosion and Ian caught it within like half a meter range of Usopp and just annihilates him. Like, they're both down. Luffy and Loki at the end of the chapter appeared. Luffy was pissed, and this was the confrontation now for the first time in this entire story between Luffy and Ian. And Loki obviously is around to really give some payback to what the Holy Knights have been doing this whole time. So we start off the chapter and it is immediate that Luffy has jumped into action to save Usopp and Brook first. The priority are his crewmates, and I love that from Luffy. Instead of going all gung-ho, instead of just, trying to 1v1 Ian because he's so angry, he's got a level head and his priority are his friends. And he is like, with incredible speed, grabbed Usopp and Brook and has rushed over to where Nami and everyone else just was on that part of the branch. They're still holding Killingham hostage. They're all still just stood talking. Like, seconds have probably passed. And he's dropped Usopp and Brook with Nami and Sanji. He's like, right, you got to look after these two. I'm going to leave them in your care. And Frankie's like, do you need backup? Like, is it bad? And he's like, I'll count on you to step in if it goes wrong, if it really goes bad. But I'm going to take a few stabs at this first because I'm real pissed. And he's like, just be careful though, you might want to get back from here. Loki's a real wild one. And Sanji like looks at him as he's going to run back and he's like, you're one to talk, like, you're just as chaotic. But we see during this moment of Luffy leaving and then is running back now, Loki is dealing with Ian, or is fighting Gunko, firing laser breath, annihilating the area that they're in. And this whole sort of several pages is Loki trying to hit Gunko, but because she's so small, he can't see her, has lost her, doesn't know where she is. Meanwhile, Ian is just sort of monologuing out loud the fact that, years ago there was a ship that was shrouded in mist, would skulk in the shadows, and would target whale government vessels. And there was always these rumours and these depictions of a giant, unimaginable flying beast. And as she, like, Eames just kind of rattling off, just like looking at Loki, is like, it seems now that there was like credence to these rumours. The truth was plain to see. You were the one who was causing anarchy at sea those years ago. So, interesting dynamic here of Eve is not really trying, is more just still going through thoughts and just deciding to go, oh, this now makes sense, you were the one who caused that. Well, fair enough, you destroyed a lot of vessels that were under my protection or, were from the world government. So we see Luffy rush back, ready to step in, and Gunko's body, like, just retches, and the shadow of Ian erupts out from her navel, like, bursts into the sky, and it is exactly like what we saw at God Valley, where the shadow of Ian rises up really elongated and just stretches out into the sky, all the tendrils, looks down and says, I will be the one to erase you from this world, just as I did rocks. And he begins the cast, and we see the demonic covenant come out, and Ian declares that you two will gain these unprecedented strength, these sheer bodies of power, but in exchange for that blessing, you will loathe each other. So an interesting dynamic of like the force of what the spells actually do, and there seems to be a lot more nuance in what Ian can maybe get a target to do. Clearly just wants them to turn on each other. So Domi Reversi gets cast. We see Luffy and Loki simultaneously get struck by the tendrils, and then they both just snap to. The tendrils get knocked away, and they're like, what was that attack? Didn't even feel a pinch. Like, are we being serious? Is this where we're at? And we see the tendrils like go back to Eam, and Eam's like, oh damn. Well, that's to be expected actually, because these two truly are. And before Eam gets to finish the sentence that we needed to hear, Luffy rushes in, does his booming dawn gatling to the shadow, and just starts to wail against Eam. So Eam clearly wasn't surprised or fazed in any way that these two individuals could resist the reverse spell. What have Luffy and Loki got in common that made it so that they couldn't be converted? There was a lot of speculation that because obviously all the giants were getting focused, it was to do maybe with their homeland, and when Ian was on like home soil, it could be those. Doesn't work on Loki here, so kind of a caveat. But then again, is it to do with the level of conquerors? I don't think so, because it wouldn't have worked on rocks, and I think that's the big stickling point here. This worked on rocks at God Valley, and he was a monster, like an actual demon. But Luffy and Loki stood here, no effect. So what is the difference between these two characters and what rocks had back in God Valley? Is it to do with the Will of D and like their outlook and perspective on things and what they stand for? But clearly, Eam is aware that there is something to do with these two, and there's like, yeah, you two truly are something, in order to know that the spell's not going to work on them, or at least it doesn't work on them right now. Whether it's to do with, you know, weakening them down before you get to convert them again, who knows? But it looks like Luffy and Loki are immune to the effects of Domi Reversi. So as Luffy's wailing on Eam, Loki decides his form and his dragon is just too cumbersome, too much, is not going to get the job done. So shrinks back down to his still ancient giant size, grabs Ragnar in hammer form, and performs his Niflheim attack to freeze Eam. Tiny Eam in Gunko's body, a giant block of ice, like almost Loki's size block of ice. Tiny shadow of Eam now trapped in the block of ice. The thing in the ice was Eam all along. Crazy. But clearly everyone's like, Luffy's dead impressed by this attack. We've just seen it again. Whether this is to do with Loki's ability still, or this is something Ragnar can do with this hammer changing form he's got, we don't know. But Luffy deflates Gear 5, you know, his tiredness has kicked in. He becomes that really old lethargic man. And we see that Eam has been subdued, has been dealt with. And we jump around now to like all the other villages. So we go to like Fishing Village, the Artisan, Alcohol Village, the West Village, the Hunting Village. All the tribes of Elbaf are now in sort of dispatching or putting out all of the fires that are left. It seems like monsters have been dealt with now. And while everyone's putting out the fires, they're like, okay, cool. So it turns out Loki wasn't, we misjudged him, he wasn't actually the evil guy we thought. It turns out, you know, Ja Rule said it, he was protecting us, he did all this, and people are still like, yeah, but he still caused all this damage, like he's a walking calamity himself. But for the moment, let's just focus on, you know, saving what we can. And we see Nami with a huge Zeus just putting out swaths of forest fires. Just everyone is taking part. Jinbei Even Lilith is trying to help, but Lilith is like, look, the ODCs have a limit still. Like, they're not, like, we can't use them to do everything. So there's still a limit to these incredible devices that Lilith has brought along. But over at the West Village, the main sort of crew that were dispatching the demonic giants have now cleared the path. The West Village has been saved, and we can see there are two others that are stumbling towards them. Like, they're regenerating. They weren't dealt a killing blow, and Zoro goes to step up to take on the charge of dispatching the last two, when Chopper runs in and goes, don't worry, I got this, and just again taps the two of them on the back, like just a little whack. They hit the ground, the table turns, the fire, they flip, and they're back to normal. And Chopper's like, Zoro, my guy, turns out, funny thing, I can just undo the demonification just by hitting them. Not sure why. And Zoro gives the best answer and is like, oh, clearly it's because you're an amazing doctor then. Only explanation. And Chopper goes into his, I don't need you to praise me, but it's really nice that you praise me. You know, you're such a jerk for wanting to praise me. And we see that Dory is laughing along, and so is Broggy, like, oh, clearly you are just amazing, Chopper. And it seems that they've done what they needed to do here with, again, another reveal, definite confirmation. Chopper has something to do with the essence of his devil fruit, or the nature of who Chopper is, maybe, that is able to be a cure to this demonification. So whether it is because he is a doctor that has got some effect here, are we getting a foretelling thing of this cure-all that Chopper wants to be? Maybe. But it's certainly interesting what Chopper's being set up for. I'm excited to see this get explained as to why Chopper is able to just undo the reverse sort of technique here. But Hiruden's more focused on what the others are getting up to. And again, we break around, we see, right, the threat's being dealt with, everyone is just putting fires out. We get a look of Elbaf and it is just covered in smoke and flames. Everyone is extinguishing the fire. Back with the rest of the Straw Hats in the Owl Library, Robin and Saul have entered, and there's signs of fire damage, but we now see it covered in ice from what Lilith had done with the ODCs. So there's, Saul is like, I see fire damage here. But what is really odd is all the shelves are empty. Not a single book in sight. And even weirder is the giant owl Biblo, who was said to stay in here but wouldn't really leave the premises, is also gone. So Robin's like, right, could Biblo have got all the books out and, you know, being able to escape? And Saul's like, look, I'd be overjoyed if that was the case, but, you know, it's not possible for a big owl to just go missing like this, especially with all these books from the library. You know, where could he have gone? So we've got a mystery now being set up with a giant owl who can gigantify things is now gone. Disappeared somewhere. Was this the Holy Knights doing? Is something else going on? We will find out, I assume. However, all the Straw Hats outside are still talking about, you know, they wrap things up pretty quickly. We went on the offense, you know, we've dealt with Killingham here, who's still just a talking head. And it's like, look, you know, against this organisation, Frankie says, you know, these guys are the Holy Knights, so we've got to be quick, we've got to be strong enough to just deal with them and take them on. But could you imagine a full war with, like, more of these guys? Like, I think these Holy Knights would have been pretty bad, but we only have to deal with 3 of them. And Killingham's like, what's going on with the Great One? Like, what is actually happening here? And we go back and we can see, before we jump to Eam, on the outskirts of the village where Summer had been dispatched, in a giant palm that he got crushed under, we see his head beginning to reform. But strangely enough, his head is in 2 parts. His top and like bottoms are like cut at the nose. And in the centre of his head, before his head snaps back together, is a metallic beating heart. What seems to be the core of these holy knights, this altered, blackened heart that looks way bigger than a regular sort of humanoid sized heart. So something very suspicious is being revealed here with what actually is going on internally with the Holy Knights. And we see someone looks slightly in pain. You know, he still feels pain just because he can regenerate. But nevertheless, he's just starting to reform now. Luffy and Loki are in discussion. Loki's begging for food. Luffy's like, what are we going to do here? And in the ice, we see Eam just disappear. So 1 minute they're just frozen. Next minute, the shadow is gone. Disappears from the ice. And this chapter concludes on the final page, where we go back to Marijua now. We go back to Pangaea Castle, but this time, across all of Elbaf, we've had a few conflicting things happen. Because when Eam first appeared, they explained the Holy Land was on fire. Then, when we went back a couple chapters ago, again it was probably just more focused on the castle. We didn't see much what was going on. Now we've got more of a zoomed out shot of the castle. We can see part of the Celestial Dragon village is in rubble. There is buildings, there is damage. Things have been overturned and destroyed. And it clearly looks like someone has been attacking Marijua and has left a considerable chunk of damage. Now, the castle doesn't look destroyed in any way, but someone is attacking, and there are really only two possibilities for someone with the strength behind them to make a move on Marijua at this time, and that is Dragon or Blackbeard. I don't think anyone else is brave enough or stupid enough to make that move. Those two are the only two individuals that could be strong enough to do this damage. And clearly, whatever's going on is still ongoing, but we need to also remember time works differently on Elbaf. We don't quite know the full stretch of time or the full ins and out of it, but we know that if you stay on Elbaf too long, you know, time just flies by. So the time difference here is really what we need to kind of figure out about how quick or how long this attack has been going on for. Is it finished? Because Eam seems pretty relaxed in this moment. Inside the flower room, Eam gives one sentence of sort of advice or telling to the five elders. So speaking on the transponder snail, Eam reaches out and says, "The Holy Land is going to be without me for a short while." The chapter ends and it just says, could Eam really be going there? I said this last chapter, we weren't going to see Eam's full moveset and abilities and capabilities while being in possession of Gunko. But now Eam is back in their original body, in their form here in the castle. For the first time, maybe even since the Void Century, Eam is leaving the castle and is probably heading for Elbaf. These elders are sat in this room, sat in the room of authority, and have just heard Eam say that they're leaving for a short while. They must be absolutely shitting themselves going, what could possibly cause Eam to want to leave to go deal with themselves? This is going to be a very, very trying moment now for the Straw Hats. This is huge. The fact that Eam themselves is taking steps to come in person and sort of handle what happens next is frightening, because this isn't going to be some great moment now of triumph. Eve's definitely not being dealt with in this arc. This is going to be pretty rough, but I'm so excited to see what unfolds. So let me know what you thought of this chapter. I do appreciate you watching. See you guys next time. Bye.